Welcome to the Volunteer Youth Worker Podcast. Youth ministries rise and fall on the volunteers. So we are here to encourage and equip you. Join the conversation as we tackle the practical questions you are asking so you can help the next generation know Jesus.
Welcome back to the Volunteer Youth Worker Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Jon and Sydney. And folks, this is going to be a fun conversation. I'm looking forward to them introducing you. But I did just want to say, because everybody can see from the podcast episode, this is going to be a fun one. How should you teach students to go to church on their own? We've been doing this podcast for a while, lots and lots and lots of episodes. And so every once in a while, I'm like, I don't know, have we talked about all of the things? Do we just need to circle back and begin over again? But here's an issue that I think is important. You think about if you're a volunteer, wherever you're at, you've got kids that are a part of your ministry. And at some point, they're not going to be part of your ministry. And you hope, are they still going to do something as practical as go to church? I mean, maybe some of them don't go to church now. So it's actually trying to convince them to make that step. But also beyond the scope of your influence, would kids continue going to church if they weren't being forced to by whoever's in their house, or if you're picking them up as a small group leader? So we're going to jump into that in a second. But first, Sydney, why don't you introduce yourself to everybody listening? Where are you coming from today? What organization are you working with? We'd love to hear from you. Tell us about yourself.
Yeah, I'm Sydney, and I work for Power to Change. I live in Ottawa, Ontario, the capital of Canada. It's always a hopping place out this way. And I lead a gap year program called GPS, which is launched through Power to Change, and we're launching this fall, which we're really excited about. And so the idea is our students would come and live with us for 8 months, and we want to see them grow deep in their faith. We want to see them discover their calling, and we want to see them equipped to serve as servants on mission in every strain of life. So that's a little bit about me.
So gap year program, so students coming straight out of high school are going to join the program, is that right?
Yeah, so we're designed for students straight out of high school, but we're also open to students that maybe they tried a year of post-secondary and it's not really fitting for them, or they've done a different gap year and they're still not really sure what to do. Mm-hmm. We kind of sit in that space before they know where they're going.
And this is more than just you're looking for roommates, like it's an actual program that they are part of for the year, is that right?
Exactly, yeah.
Exciting. That's fun. Okay, and that's in Ottawa. And you guys are you downtown Ottawa? Are you in the suburbs? Where are you guys at?
Yeah, we're close to downtown, so if anybody knows what Ottawa is like, it's a little bit of clusters of different communities. So we're located in some of the secondary clusters. We're not quite the suburbs, but we're not quite the downtown core either.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
So fun. All right, well, Sydney, we're happy to have you part of this conversation. We've been thinking about this topic for a bit, and so we'll get your wisdom in a second. But Jon, introduce yourself for everybody so they know who you are.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. My name's Jon Berends. I'm in Hamilton, Ontario. I direct a gap year program called Act 5. We're going into our 4th year right now. We're currently run out of Redeemer University here in Ancaster, and so we're right by in Hamilton. But we're in the process of going on our own, incorporating, which is really exciting. And so we're in an exciting season here. Our program, similar things to what Sydney said. I think that we're trying to meet some similar needs for students out of high school, directly or after, within a couple of years, to live in this community of learning and practice, all geared towards Christian formation in a way that kind of connects discipleship towards mission in all things, similar to what Sydney said. Similar to an 8-month program, there's some academics part of this. We go on a bunch of wilderness trips and cross-cultural learning trips, and we engage with Indigenous peoples in Canada. And then our students get into workplaces for a significant amount of time, which I think Sydney's doing as well. So lots of similar things, trying to meet similar needs, paying attention to similar things. So
you guys aren't fighting with each other for students. Is that what you're trying to say?
Honestly,
co-laborers.
There's enough students for everybody.
We think students, everyone needs this kind of stuff. And so we just need more of us trying to do this in creative ways, I think. So.
Oh, so good. Well, and we know, if you're listening, and maybe you've heard us talk about the Renegotiating Faith Research Project. So a few years ago in our country, we surveyed kids that had graduated and that had been connected to church. And one of the big markers, one of the major findings was that if students had completed a gap year program like you guys have, the chances of them continuing on in their faith into their young adult years was significantly more. And I'm hesitant to give a specific number unless you guys know it. But I remember being a significant way that you could increase the likelihood of a kid following Jesus post high school. So we're excited about the work that you guys are doing for sure. Okay, so with that in mind, you guys work with students coming right out of high school. Tell me, what's the issue and why is it worth talking about teaching students to go to church on their own? Because it seems like as youth workers, that is something that we get a little bit nervous about. Is that a fair thing to be nervous about? That some students might not even know how to go to church on their own?
Yeah. Sydney, do you want to answer this first?
Oh, you go ahead.
Yeah. So I think it is. I think that, even the question of going to church on your own, I think what we're trying to say is going to church without their parents, going to church without someone saying you have to go to church. And I think it is an issue. I think that the way we start to solve this, the way that we start to kind of recognize this problem is by looking at, like, what are we hoping for? Like, why do we want them to go to church? Is it because we're scared of the world around them and we just want them to be okay, which is totally understandable. I think it's, are we wanting them to grow in a relationship with God? Are we wanting them to flourish? I think that sometimes the longings and the desire and what we're imagining church is for among adults in the lives of young people, sometimes it's like we haven't really thought about that ourselves. And I think that we can start there. I think that church is a place for us to grow in fellowship with other believers, where all of ourselves are being engaged and then we're being sent out into the world, encouraged and challenged and renewed consistently to then engage in our place as well. And I think that if we are doing that as adults in the room, then I think that that's a vision of church and church participation that can captivate young people. So there's an initial thought.
Yeah, I think that's helpful because, when you say, why do we want kids to go to church? I mean, the first thing that jumped in my mind is like, because their grandmas are going to be upset if they don't. Like, gosh, my grandma wants to know that she loves me and grandma's great. But yeah, there is a sense of like, just that routine is important, but we don't always think about why that's actually important. And so thoughtfully considering that as volunteers is important to know, why would we encourage our kids to go? And I love a couple of things that you said there, Jon, about, it more than just being the act of going. And yet sometimes I wonder, like, even if you have bad motivations for showing up at a congregation on a Sunday morning, there's probably still great things that could come from being in that place.
Totally.
For the most part. So, yeah. But tell me, okay, so why though? So if we believe church is a valuable community to be a part of, what's the issue? What's the thing that you guys notice with university students? Why doesn't that transfer super easily? Like they've been going to church, they've been out of youth ministry, they end up in university, and then all of a sudden it's like, this becomes a question. Maybe they don't go, or maybe they just watch online, or maybe they skip community altogether. Like, what ends up happening that they don't actually engage on their own? And maybe, Sydney, I'll throw it to you.
Yeah. I think there's a couple of, I don't want to say issues, but a couple of reasons why this happens. First and foremost is the fact that straight out of high school, especially when students go straight to a post-secondary experience, whatever that is, if it's a workplace and they're leaving their parents' home, if it's a college, university, whatever, they're given a lot of autonomy. And while that seems great, it's also chaotic. It's the first time in their lives where they're responsible for every single aspect of their well-being. And oftentimes, spirituality falls to the bottom. It's kind of looked at as, oh, well, Sunday morning I could be doing more homework, or I was busy all week, so now I'm going to do all my meal prep at this time, and just kind of discovering, I think part of it is just discovering where their priorities lie, and this understanding that spirituality is something that I can fit in when I have time. And I think that's a mindset that a lot of students come out of high school with. The other piece of that is that particularly students that had experiences in high school during the pandemic look at, like, online church, for example, as, oh, that's me doing my checkbox of going to church. And there's nothing wrong with online churches, with the exception of students aren't engaging with community. They're not engaging with specifically Christian community and the value of that, the importance of being a part of the church with a capital C, as opposed to I go to a church. And especially if they go to a non-Christian intentional post-secondary experience, they're a lot less likely to reach out and find those on-campus environments or congregational environments.
Yeah.
And that, that's a bit of a
I think that's really helpful.
space.
And I kind of want to know what you guys think, if this is something that that as youth workers we miss in their middle school and high school years, or is it just what happens just in our culture as students graduate, and it's a developmental thing as they kind of cross some of these thresholds. What's your thoughts on that, Jon?
Yeah, so I'll get to that partly through jumping on what Sydney said about autonomy. I think that our expectations of 18-year-old being able to handle the level of freedom that they're given is wrong. They're not. I mean, like neurologically, they're not ready for that. And that's not how we're made to flourish, right? Like we're not made to just be fully autonomous where we make all of our own choices. And I don't think that the majority of 18-year-olds have a brain that's able to do that. And so if we moralize it and say like they're not going to church because they don't care, sometimes it's because they just can't, they don't know how to do that. They're not able to get themselves to make that choice in the midst of everything being thrown at them that's overwhelming. And so I think that there has to be connectivity between communities and relationships of meaning from where they're from that are bridging that gap with them for where they are now, to bring them to places, to connect them with people and to help them. Like we don't want to overemphasize this narrative of like, you're grown up now, you have to make your own choices. It's like the adolescent brain isn't done developing until you're like in your mid to late 20s. Like they're actually physiologically not grown up yet. And it's overwhelming what's being thrown at them. So I think strategy number one is like stay connected actively, and communicate that in youth groups as like, that's part of what we do. We're going to stay connected with you. We're going to come to you and connect with you in the fall. We're going to get you together with ministry leaders. And I think it's peers, right? So like, this is where opportunities with campus ministry can connect with this. Like getting connected to a new community of belonging, because otherwise they're going to find that community of belonging somewhere else. And what they care about most is a community within which to belong. That's more important to them than what they're belonging about always.
I want to go, if I can just go back to what you said about students aren't ready, or it's not right to just give them that much freedom and autonomy and assume it's going to work out right. Because I think I heard in one side of my mind, I heard like a pushback of people thinking like, oh yeah, but remember 50 years ago or 60 years ago, like people went to war when they're 18 and people went and got jobs when they're 18, whatever. Which is, I think there's a truth to that for sure. And there was generations where that kind of things happened. But I would also say in those moments and in those generations, there was also a massive amount of tradition and a massive amount of community and a massive amount of expectation that when you went into the workforce as a young person, or a younger person, or whatever it might be, or accept some of this level of responsibility, there was a framework of how you might actually work within with that. It ended up being limited freedom. So although it feels like we would send students out like, oh yeah, they went and you buy a house as an 18-year-old and you're in your full-time job and you went to the factory. It's like, yeah, but it wasn't the level of autonomy that you would experience today because of those social expectations. I think that's my guess.
Yeah. So I'll speak to that and then I'll give it back to you, Sydney. I think that, it's a whole other podcast to talk about all of the different cultural differences between now and 50 years from now. One thing I would say is that for us in older generations, at some level, we have to stop always talking about how kids should be like they were back then, because they're not. And the world is different. And we don't need to understand how we got here. Totally, we are here. And this is the water they're swimming in. And us just critiquing the water they're swimming in isn't going to change it for them. This is the world, and we can't expect them to be 18-year-olds from 50 years ago. There's an unbearable amount of expected autonomy and an ability to choose within that and have all the right opinions about it and have the right procured image within this. But the pressure is, we do not know what that is like if we haven't been through that. I wanted to come back, Jeremy, to your first question of like, what can you do in youth groups? The other thing I wanted to say, so I think it's maintaining some connectivity in these relationships post-high school. Yeah. The other thing is to facilitate this conversation of like, why do I go to church? What is church? Where it's not just like, you got to do it this way and it fits in this box. Because part of it is then adolescents moving on are like, I don't want to fit in a box. I want to explore. And if they haven't been presented a picture of how they can explore within faith, then their desire and need to explore has to, in their mind, happen outside of faith. And so I think in youth groups and stuff, to start outside of parents, going to new church communities, like go to Catholic Mass with your kids, talk about it. Like, what is that like? Where do we see synergy and differences between our more evangelical faith? Or like, go to an Orthodox church, go to like a Quaker circle of friends and talk about like, what is this like to follow Jesus here? So that you're capturing a young person's desire to wrestle and wonder and realizing like, oh, we don't need to be afraid of that. We can do that. And like Jesus is part of all of that. And the kingdom of God is that big. Because if they're doing that while they're with you, within that really like safe, contained space of a youth group, then when they go off, there's like, oh, I actually do have some choice, but it's healthy choice with like boundaries around it within the community of faith, as opposed to like, I got to keep just checking off the box, just doing what my grandma would want me to do. I think that could be a piece that's really, really neat to see happening in youth groups.
Again, we love grandma. But
we do love grandma.
Okay, and you also said Quaker circle of friends. If there's somebody listening that's in a Quaker community, I would love to hear from you, only for my own personal interest, because I have no idea even how to find a Quaker community.
Yeah. We take our students here at Act 5. This is what we do here. Like we really want them to belong, and we facilitate them belonging part of a local church community when they come to us for a year.
Yeah.
But we also spend certain Sundays going to the different kinds of communities I mentioned, and it's so rich for them. And some of them say to us, like, I always felt like my faith was like, I had to think this, this, and this. And it's not that we're trying to just like deconstruct, break down everything. No, think whatever you want. It's more like we trust that God is really good and really big, and he will hold you. You're allowed to like, let's go to this community because they think what they're doing is the version of faith that's the most true.
Sure.
And I don't hold the keys to the kingdom. You don't. They don't. Right? And it's so rich for them. They're like, oh, wow, God is big and powerful and mysterious. I want to be part of that family. Really, really beautiful to see.
That's so cool. And so, okay, let me just recap what you said, because I think these categories are helpful. But then I want to hear a story or two again about experiencing these other communities. So you suggested. So how should we teach students to go to church on their own? I think we said we should follow them when they go on their own and actually keep track of them. I think that's worthwhile. And if you're a volunteer, you're listening to this, you can do that. You can ask your point leader, if you graduate students at a grade 12, to continue to be their small group leader, even though you don't meet regularly with them, but you can, on a Wednesday night or whatever your youth night is, use that time to reach out and to check in with your students. Jon, you mentioned the idea of let's actually think about this practice of going to church as this one example, but obviously you can apply this in other places. Let's talk with our students. Let's talk with our middle school students. Why is this important? And, maybe there's those weeks that the small group conversation, isn't connecting anyways to whatever the topic of the night was. And so you need like an offshoot. You just throw the question out like, hey, have you guys ever thought about why people go to church? Let's talk about this. And then actually practice the experience in a way that will be fresh and new for your students, and do it in the community. Go as a small group. Can you imagine? I mean, you got to get permission. Maybe you have to sign permission forms. You have to answer some confused questions from parents, but take your grade 8 small group and go to a Catholic Mass and then have lunch afterwards and talk about it. How cool would that be?
Really cool.
But then, Jon, tell me what ends up happening in the conversation on the drive away from some of those communities.
It puts them in a position where they're now talking about differences between their beliefs, even within our community, because they're like, oh, like there's lots of differences out there. I always assumed everyone thought this. And so it facilitates conversation and a sense of like, it dials the temperature down where like we can all believe in God and want to follow Jesus and be his disciples in this world. And there are some core things that we all hold on to. And then there's other things that we don't agree on, and maybe kind of realizing what actually is central to my faith and what all of a sudden now it's like, and I have some room to wonder about this. And it's not all or nothing. It's not like I question my whole faith or I question none of it. You can start to kind of sift through that of like, whoa, look at, like I was inspired by this Orthodox community and their vision, like their understanding of image and sacrament, or like the Quaker community, like they're the most hospitable community. And like in our world of tech, look at what they're doing and saying, we're not going to live that way. Like, wow, we have a lot to be challenged by that, but I don't need to be them. Like, it just facilitates dynamic conversation and really healthy spaces to disagree well together.
I love that so much. It makes me, excited about the possibilities and the idea that students can learn what it means to not give up their whole faith if they're wrestling with a particular part of it. The other thing that made me think about is, and this happens, a lot of people that are listening have maybe done the Alpha film course, and there's a week, I forget which week it is, where there's the diagram of the pool, and they use that as a means of asking students, hey, where do you feel like your faith is? And just the act of being able to, as a teenager, middle school, high school, to identify like, oh, this is kind of where I'm at in my faith journey. Anything that does that is so valuable as a small group and as a small group leader, because it helps you discern a little bit of what their next step in their faith journey might be. And so if you can spark that conversation in this kind of way, using this means, baptism is another great one. If students haven't been baptized, they get a chance to talk about what matters to them about their faith. Any of those kinds of things I think are so valuable. Okay, Sydney, I want to hear from you in the midst of this and your work with students. What from these ideas resonate? Do you want to add anything else to that, or shift and disagree with everything that Jon has just said?
I think I appreciate everything that Jon mentioned. One thing that he mentioned that I don't know if it's necessarily a pushback, but I think it's worth noting we need to be careful about is while students aren't necessarily equipped or prepared for the level of autonomy that they're given straight out of high school, I think we as people aren't designed to have full autonomy. And so that's overwhelming for anybody. And the other thing is that we can't forget that while students now are in a different place than 50 years ago, adolescence actually exists now, that kind of thing. We also need to remember that our students are far more advanced than they were at this age years ago. They've been exposed to technology from birth. They have much more advanced conversations much younger. And so I think there's a piece of warning, I would say, in terms of viewing your students as children. I think there's value in engaging in conversations with your students as fellow believers and engaging them in those conversations in high school about, okay, what is it that you guys believe? How would you interpret this scripture? How would you think about this topic? Because I think that does three things. It does, not only it shows them that you value and respect their input, but it also puts the onus on them early for their own discipleship, that when they're having a conversation and you're like, okay, well, here's an idea. Where's that found in scripture? If they can't answer that, then that's a great opportunity to encourage them to dig into the Bible themselves. It's a great opportunity to steer them into more resources. Alpha does a great job of, like their youth program in particular, really getting students to think about what is it that I believe and where is it founded. And so that's one thing I would say, like as a youth group, small group leader, engaging your students in mature conversation about faith and what they believe and how they practice it is so valuable. And we know that the most valuable thing coming out of those pockets of weekly interaction or multiple times a week interaction is that community relationship building. And I think we see the way to do discipleship is life on life. So the more you can do that in your pockets, the more valuable it's going to be for your students, and the more they're going to trust you in asking the hard questions. Because the worst thing that could happen is your students ask the internet the hard questions. We know that they're not always going to ask their parents, so you get to be kind of sitting in that middle ground of, I can both be a mentor and in a different stage of life, but I can also be a peer journeying with Jesus at the same level as you. We both inhabit the Holy Spirit in giving our lives to Jesus, and he's speaking to us in different ways, and that's the beauty of the body of Christ, is that we get to do this together. And I think that also demonstrates a bit of a craving for how we're designed to be in community. And so students coming out of high school then are craving that kind of conversation outside of the surface level chats that happen in 2-word texts.
Yeah. Okay. There's so much good stuff there. It made me think of so I want to say when you talk about like that whole life on life, there's a whole bit in youth ministry, and I know as volunteers you don't have to read all the youth ministry books, but Chap Clark from back in the day was Fuller Youth Institute, and the whole sticky faith, and there's hurt, and then he wrote this book on adoptive ministry, and the idea that as youth workers, we're actually mutually in this community, in this family of God with our students. So we're both, sons and daughters of the King, and to try to level the playing field so that we don't feel the pressure of needing to be an authority figure in the lives of our teenagers. Obviously we naturally carry a bit of authority, so we want to be good stewards of that, but that we fight for the ability to be, and I think this is, D.T. Niles quote. This could be the wrong attribution, but evangelism, this isn't going to connect totally, but let me draw a line. Evangelism is just one beggar telling another beggar where to find the bread. The idea that maybe our faith is actually two beggars, our students and us, talking about what it means to be fed by God. And so what would it mean for us to actually think about this whole conversation about church and do it as on the level playing field of trying to articulate for ourselves, this is the value of our community and why, we personally, and so we're inviting students into that as peers in the journey, and what that might actually mean. I was with a buddy of mine today. We went for a run. He was just sharing one of the kids from his small group. He's a grade 8 guy, small group leader. And this guy's disengaging from faith and kind of going down a tough path. And he's trying to wrestle with what kind of attitude do I take to the conversation? So we're just kind of spitballing together. And he's like, well, I could come on strong. What do you think you're doing? And you know better than that. To be honest, I think, where our students are at, for them to feel like there is that peer and there's that care, that's going to be a much more better response, or we're going to experience a much better response from that. And so as we think about this whole, how do we invite students into this journey more, to offer that as a peer in the journey, I think there'll be an interesting response, and I think we'll be happy with it. Okay, we've got this is great conversation, but I think we need to bring it in on a closing. So let me just recap, and then I'll give last words to each of you, and then we'll shift to the very end, where we'll tell people where they can find a little bit more about each of the programs that you guys are running. So we asked, how should you teach students to go to church on their own? And we've talked about making sure that as small group leaders, we follow them closely as they move on, as they move away even. So if you got students that your grade 7 small group leader, they've moved away, track with them, follow up with them, see if they found good community where they're going. Move that idea into actual practice and talk about what it means personally for you, and then practice going to church as a community, as a small group, and maybe even go to other places that will be surprising, so students get that experience and that practice, so they'll be more prepared when they do finally find the freedom wherever they end up in life down the road. Anything else that you want to add to that, John?
Yeah, you just said the word, and what you just said, you just mentioned the word practice. And that was something I was thinking about as Sydney was talking about. I think that we need to create in our different spheres of influence that we're not just communities that talk about ideas, but that we're communities of practice. And, people talk about this being the age of authenticity, for better or for worse, but young people are watching us, they want to see how we live. And so, they're watching how we're on our phones. They're watching whether we actually have relationships with our neighbors, whether we're hospitable people. And I think that creating and facilitating these communities where, like what you were saying, Jeremy, around where you're working it out together with them, also how you're living this out together as a community where you're practicing the life of following Jesus together in real places where our points of meaning isn't just when we sit in a youth room together. It's where they're hey, why don't you come over for dinner? I'm having some neighbors over, or I'm running an event in my neighborhood, or I'm just come over sometimes and study here in my home, because then they're going to be in a space where they're watching how I structure my own life. And I think that can be where I kind of connect to what we're trying to do. And Act 5 is this, along with everything we do with them, then it's all housed within a big home together as a community of practice, where we're practicing living the life of Jesus in every ordinary moment together, not just doing cool things and talking about cool ideas, but practicing the life of following Jesus together. And they're actively watching their mentors and staff in the room with them to see whatever you have, the way you're living your days, it's a model for me, and I want what you're doing. And how do I create a life for me there?
Yeah, that's so good.
Mm-hmm.
Sydney, anything else that you wanted to add to the mix as we wrap things up?
I think I would just add to what Jon was saying there in terms of it's also a life of perspective. Exposing students to multiple perspectives, even within the body of Christ, that is invaluable. And that's the kind of thing that we do here at GPS as well. They're living life together, but they're all from different places, different backgrounds, different perspectives of even the same topic. And we can agree and disagree and still love and still respect. And that is something that's so valuable to teach in the context of community. And church gets to be that community. Gap year programs like ours get to be that community. And we get to learn more about who God is, because that's the beauty of the body. We each have one perspective, and together they make up the big pictograph of God's character.
Yeah, I love that so much. All right. Well, fill people in on where they can find you. We'll put this stuff in the show notes as well. But where can they track down what's going on with GPS and with Act 5? Jon, let's start with you.
So Act 5, if you just go to www.act5.com, you'll find us. It's spelled out. It's not Acts 5. That's the story of Ananias and Sapphira dropping dead. It's just Act 5. If you spell it out, you can search for us on Google too.
The Google will help it. And obviously we will link that in the show notes as well, and people can find out. Obviously you would love to talk with people that are interested if they have got students.
Love to. Yeah, always interested. Mm-hmm.
Amazing. And Sydney, what about for you?
Yeah, you can find us at connectingstreams.com/GPS. You can also find us through just about any powertochange.com link. Or you can contact us directly. It's my first name, Sydney, at my last name, which is hard to spell, so that'll be in the show notes, Sequillion, at p2c.com.
Fantastic. Well, friends, thanks so much for tuning in today. We'll be back next week with another episode. And thanks to Sydney and for Jon for dropping their wisdom. And like I said, everything is in the show notes. If you'd like to chat with them, I know they would love to have a conversation with you. And so hope you have a great day and a great ministry. You really are making an eternal difference. And we appreciate the investment you're making into the spiritual lives of teenagers. We'll see you next time.